Mark Watson was known in the business world as a successful black entrepreneur who, through perseverance and talent, managed to build a true empire in the fashion world. His company, Silver Thread, consisted of a network of luxury clothing stores that attracted wealthy clients with refined collections and high-class service. However, despite his success, Mark increasingly heard complaints from some employees and clients about biased attitudes from staff in some of his stores, especially towards those who didn't fit the stereotypes of the right customer. For Mark, who had known discrimination and injustice since childhood, this was unacceptable. Mark grew up in a poor neighborhood in Chicago, where his family constantly faced racial prejudice. As a teenager, he saw how his father was humiliated in stores, how his mother was disregarded in banks, and how he himself was looked at with suspicion just because of the color of his skin. These memories stayed with him throughout his life and became a major part of his motivation to prove to himself and the world that he could succeed, no matter what. When he started building his business, he dreamed of creating a company where people wouldn't feel like second-class citizens. But now, hearing about potential discrimination in his stores, Mark felt that something had gone wrong. To understand how serious the issue was, Mark decided to personally visit one of his stores incognito. He wanted to see everything with his own eyes, without the influence of his status. On a cool autumn day, he put on an old jacket, worn jeans, and sneakers, hoping that no one would recognize him as the successful owner of a boutique chain. His goal was simple: to see how he would be treated when mistaken for an ordinary black man rather than the owner of a fashion brand. He headed to one of his most prestigious Silver Thread boutiques on Madison Avenue in New York City. As soon as he entered the store, Mark immediately felt the watchful gaze of the manager, Andrew Hall. Andrew was a middle-aged man with gray hair and a perfectly pressed suit that looked like every element was carefully chosen to emphasize his status. But behind his restrained exterior, Mark quickly noticed something more. Andrew looked at him the way many had looked in the past, with bias and distrust. It was the same look Mark had seen on the faces of police officers, salespeople, and bank employees when he was a teenager. A look that said, "You don't belong here." Mark walked over to a display of exclusive suits, but from the start, he felt that to Andrew he was just another black man who didn't fit into the environment. The manager, standing by the counter with a sales associate, didn't even try to approach him or offer assistance. Instead, he pretended to be busy but kept Mark in his line of sight. Mark noticed how Andrew exchanged a knowing glance with another salesperson, as if silently saying, "This person won't stay here long." Mark slowly walked along the row of expensive suits, as if studying them, but he was more focused on the staff's reactions. It didn't take long for him to notice that other customers, mostly white men and women dressed in expensive clothing, received far more attention and warmth from the staff. They were all offered assistance with smiles, had the benefits of the models explained to them, and were served coffee. Meanwhile, Mark remained in the shadows, invisible to everyone except those who saw him only as a potential threat. It was a painfully familiar feeling, the sense of not being treated as an equal. In his dreams, Mark imagined that his success would change these stereotypes, that he would manage to create a place free of such prejudices. But standing in his own store, he realized that even here, as a black man, much remained unchanged. He once again felt that cold wave of rejection that had accompanied him in his youth when he entered stores and noticed how people watched him, as if he was bound to steal something. When Mark decided to approach one of the displays with particularly expensive suits, he noticed Andrew tense up. The manager, who had been trying to appear busy until then, turned toward Mark, and a mix of suspicion and overt distrust appeared in his eyes. Mark saw Andrew cross his arms over his chest, as if trying to assert his position as a protector of this place from people like him. At that moment, Mark realized that Andrew saw him not as a customer, but as someone who didn't belong. Andrew said nothing, but all his behavior screamed of prejudice. His gaze said, "You're not a customer here, you're an outsider." It was the same look Mark had seen as a child when he entered stores in his neighborhood and felt how the staff watched him, afraid he would steal something. It was the same look he encountered from security guards in stores as soon as he stepped inside. Mark remained calm on the outside, but inside, he was filled with emotions. He knew that if a white man dressed the same way had entered that store, he would have been met with a smile and an offer of help. But for Mark, despite all his achievements, skin color remained a barrier he couldn't overcome. He felt once more like that same teenager who was disregarded and judged not by his qualities but by stereotypes. As he left the store, Mark realized that for him, this wasn't just a disappointment, it was a challenge. He understood that the racial prejudices he had fought all his life had infiltrated even his own business. He stepped out onto the street, feeling the cold wind against his face, and realized that this day would change many things. He couldn't allow his business to become yet another place where people were judged by the color of their skin. Mark knew he would have a difficult conversation with Andrew and possibly with other managers. But he was ready to go all the way to prove that his stores were not just places where clothes were sold, but places where every person felt valued and respected, regardless of their race or appearance. The next morning, Mark Watson returned to his office in downtown Manhattan with a heavy heart. He had spent a sleepless night, mentally revisiting every moment of his visit to the Silver Thread boutique on Madison Avenue. What was supposed to be a simple inspection turned into a painful reminder of the racial biases he thought were long behind him. He realized that the problem he encountered was not limited to just one store. It was a deeper issue, rooted in the perceptions and behavior of his staff. That morning, Mark decided not to delay the meeting with the boutique's manager, Andrew Hall. He knew that without discussing yesterday's incident, change would be impossible. So, he sent Andrew an invitation to the Silver Thread headquarters under the pretense of discussing new sales goals and future plans. As expected, Andrew arrived with the confidence that it would be a regular meeting, where he would be praised for his management success. Andrew was well prepared. He had meticulously pressed his dark blue suit, worn expensive cufflinks, and shoes that shone with cleanliness. His walk was confident, but when he entered Mark's large, bright office, his confidence wavered. He hadn't expected to see his boss, the same stranger he had ignored and underestimated in his store the day before. Mark greeted Andrew with a cold look. He was dressed in a strict gray suit that highlighted his status as the owner, but his expression conveyed determination and firmness. Andrew immediately understood that this meeting would be far from as pleasant as he had hoped. In Mark's eyes, there was a mixture of disappointment and a firm intention to address the problem. Mark offered Andrew a seat and began the conversation, reminding him of the previous day's visit. As soon as Mark mentioned his undercover inspection, Andrew's face paled slightly, and he began nervously adjusting his tie. He realized that he hadn't recognized Mark that day, but at the time, it had seemed insignificant. Now, however, his actions were under the boss's scrutiny, and excuses no longer worked. Andrew tried to maintain professionalism, but his voice betrayed his tension. Mark calmly and methodically listed all the things he had noticed about the staff's behavior, including Andrew's. He spoke of the cold looks, the lack of welcoming words, and the clear preference given to white customers. He recalled how he felt not just a lack of attention, but a clear reluctance to serve him. He spoke of how it reminded him of his own experiences in youth, when people judged him by his appearance and expected the worst simply because of his skin color. Andrew tried to justify himself, claiming that he was merely maintaining the boutique's standard, that his goal was to attract customers who matched the image of an elite buyer. But deep down, he knew that his words sounded like a weak excuse. He recognized that his biased attitude became evident when he saw a black man in simple clothes showing interest in expensive items. It was an unconscious reaction, the result of years of stereotypes and habits. Andrew claimed he was just doing his job, but Mark knew it wasn't just a job. It was discrimination, rooted in stereotypes. Mark listened to Andrew's excuses with a stony expression. He understood that there was some truth in Andrew's words. Stores of this caliber often rely on their image and strive to maintain an air of exclusivity. But using these words as a cover for his biased attitude was unacceptable to Mark. Mark knew that such behavior was not only unfair, but also contradicted all the values upon which he built his company. His dream of a business that would be a model of inclusivity and openness was crumbling before his eyes. At one point, Mark noticed Andrew becoming nervous, his voice growing louder and sharper as he tried to explain his position. But Mark did not interrupt him, allowing him to speak. He knew that deep down, Andrew wasn't ready to acknowledge his mistakes. For him, it was merely a part of the job he had been doing for many years. In Andrew's eyes, Mark was an exception, a black man who had succeeded and who shouldn't have to face the same difficulties as others. But Mark knew that this was a misconception, that his success did not negate the bias faced by others like him. When Andrew finished speaking, Mark replied firmly and calmly, but his words carried all the pain and bitterness of past experiences. He reminded Andrew that every customer, regardless of skin color or clothing, deserves respectful treatment. He explained that his company, Silver Thread, was founded on principles of equality and inclusivity, and that he would not tolerate bias in his stores. Mark's words were not just criticism. They were an accusation that Andrew couldn't ignore. For Andrew, it was a blow, but for Mark, it was a necessity to defend what he believed in. Mark understood that he had a long way to go in changing the culture within the company. Andrew was just one of many who might hold similar views, but Mark was ready for this fight, knowing that in the struggle against bias and discrimination, every little thing matters. He knew he faced a difficult decision that could cause dissatisfaction, but he was ready to make it in order to protect his dream, a company where everyone feels respected, no matter who they are or where they come from. As the meeting drew to a close, Mark realized that Andrew would not change, at least not immediately. His words were an attempt to justify himself, not an admission of his mistakes. And so, without a moment's hesitation, Mark informed Andrew that he could no longer remain in his position. Andrew was stunned, his face reddened with anger and humiliation, but he said nothing in response. He knew he had already lost. Leaving Mark's office, Andrew barely contained his irritation and resentment. For him, it was not just the loss of a job, but also the loss of the familiar sense of control and authority. But for Mark, it was the first step towards turning Silver Thread into what he had always dreamed his company would be. A place where people judge each other not by their appearance, but by their worth. Mark knew that challenges lay ahead, but he was sure of one thing. He would not allow bias to take hold in his business again. After the meeting with Andrew Hall, when Mark Watson ultimately decided to dismiss him from his position as manager, he understood that this decision was only the beginning of a long and difficult journey. Firing one person wouldn't fix the systemic issues that, as he now realized, were deeply rooted in his company. Mark was determined to address the underlying prejudices and discrimination that had infiltrated his business. He felt both disappointed and ready to fight, a fight for the company he had built, which now needed to change. Mark knew he needed someone who could share his vision and help implement the changes. He thought of Christine Martin, a senior salesperson working in the same boutique. Christine, a young woman with experience in the fashion industry, always stood out for her attention to clients and genuine warmth in her interactions. But what distinguished her most was her ability to see the individuality in each person, rather than stereotypes. Christine was not just a professional in her field. She herself knew what it meant to be not the one who fits the stereotypes of a typical employee in a high-end boutique. Her own family, who had moved to New York from a small town, often faced biased attitudes due to their background and status. She knew what it felt like to be an outsider in a world where appearance and status determined how people treated you. Christine always made an effort to ensure that people felt comfortable in the store, regardless of who they were and where they came from. When Mark invited her to a meeting at his office, Christine was surprised, but soon realized that this conversation wasn't about a promotion or another sales plan. Mark shared his vision with her and talked about his mission, to make Silver Thread not just a luxury store, but a place where everyone feels respected. He shared with her his recent experience visiting the store and what he had seen with his own eyes. He spoke about how painful it was to once again experience the same prejudices he had faced in his youth, and how unbearable it was to see this happening within his own company. Christine listened intently, and her eyes showed support and understanding. She knew that for Mark, this was not just business, it was a personal struggle, and she was ready to help him with it. Memories of customers she had seen in the store came to her mind, those whom her colleagues looked down on, those who left the boutique feeling like they didn't belong. She too had seen how Andrew and other staff viewed people through the lens of their appearance and assumptions about their financial means. Mark offered Christine the temporary position of manager at the Madison Avenue boutique. This was not just a promotion, but an opportunity to change the store's culture from within. Christine understood that a tough job awaited her. She would have to train the staff, change their attitudes toward customers, and implement new policies that aligned with the company's values. But she also realized that this was her chance to help people feel respected in a place that had previously pushed them away. From the first days in her new position, Christine faced challenges. Some employees, accustomed to Andrew's strict approach, were skeptical of her new management style. Christine tried to explain that the luxury of the store lay not only in its products, but in how they treated everyone who walked through the boutique's doors. But her words met with hidden and sometimes open resistance. Some salespeople, who had worked at Silver Thread for years, believed that the store's exclusivity was the foundation of its success and thought that warmth and openness could not be applied to their clientele. One day, Christine overheard one of the salespeople whispering to a colleague in the back room, discussing how they would now have to put up with just anyone. This comment filled her with a sense of bitterness, but also spurred her into decisive action. She realized that many saw the new rules as a threat to their familiar way of doing things, but Christine knew these changes were necessary. Christine began working with each employee individually, conducting training sessions on improving service and inclusivity. She spoke about the importance of every client, emphasizing that their job wasn't to judge people by their appearance, but to create an atmosphere where people felt comfortable. She provided examples of how even the smallest gesture or word could change a customer's impression of the store and the company as a whole. She explained that what made Silver Thread unique wasn't just the designer clothing on display, but the way they treated people. Mark visited the boutique regularly, observing Christine's progress. He saw that the atmosphere in the store began to change. Of course, not all employees were happy with the changes, but some began to realize that the new policy brought positive results. Staff members started smiling more often at customers, offering help without regard to their appearance. Mark noticed how Christine's expression changed when she interacted with clients. She seemed genuinely happy to see each person who walked through the boutique's doors. But there were many challenges along the way. One of the veteran salespeople, Roger, who had worked with Andrew for many years, once openly told Christine that he didn't understand why they should lower the bar. He was convinced that their exclusive status was what attracted wealthy clients. Although Christine tried to remain calm, she realized that Roger and those who shared his views embodied the very issues that she and Mark needed to fight. For people like Roger, customers were divided into the worthy and the unworthy, and he was sure he could identify them at a glance. That day, Christine called Mark and told him about the difficulties she was facing. Mark listened, understanding that this challenge wasn't just another managerial task, but a fight for the values he believed in. He knew that such views wouldn't disappear overnight and that change would take time, but he also knew that this was the only way to build a company where every person was respected. He reassured Christine of his support and encouraged her to continue working on implementing the new policies, despite the resistance. He also told her that he would personally hold a meeting with the staff to discuss the company's values and its future strategy. Mark understood that he needed not only to give Christine the authority, but also to personally show everyone that these changes were his personal mission, that he wouldn't back down. And although Christine knew there was still much work to be done, she felt more confident. She knew that Mark was on her side, and that their goal was not just to improve sales, but to create a place where every client would feel valued. It was a struggle not only for the future of Silver Thread, but also to realize Mark's dream, a dream of a company that didn't just sell luxury, but also imparted a sense of self-worth to every person, regardless of their skin color. For Mark and Christine, this was only the first step on a long journey. They both knew that challenges lay ahead, but each day at Silver Thread became another opportunity to prove that change was possible, that it was possible to build a company where every person matters. And Mark knew that he was no longer alone in his fight. He had the support of those who believed in the same things he did. With the onset of changes at the Silver Thread boutique on Madison Avenue, the atmosphere within the team began to shift. But the changes did not come easily, and even those who initially supported the idea of treating every customer with respect started to show hidden resistance. Christine Martin, the manager appointed by Mark Watson to implement this new approach, encountered many employees who viewed her efforts as a threat to their familiar ways. Among them were those who believed that racial inclusivity and equal treatment for all clients undermined the boutique's elite status. The most challenging person to persuade was Roger, a veteran salesperson who had worked under Andrew Hall's leadership for many years. Roger was convinced that a luxury boutique was a place meant only for those who could afford it, and that the staff's role was to maintain this high standard, filtering out unfit customers. In his eyes, those who did not look like typical patrons of upscale boutiques were outsiders here. He believed that allowing such clients to feel comfortable would undermine the store's image. One day, during a team meeting focused on implementing the new policy, Christine noticed Roger sitting in the back row, frowning with his arms crossed. He listened to her speech about the importance of inclusivity and respectful treatment of all customers with obvious displeasure. When she finished, Roger stood up and, without hiding his irritation, asked a question that became the theme of the resistance. Why should we lower the bar for people who can't even afford anything in our store? The question caused the entire room to fall silent. Several other salespeople, who had been listening quietly, exchanged glances, and Christine caught a sense of agreement with Roger in their eyes. Christine felt the weight of the situation. She understood that these words reflected what many were thinking but didn't dare to say out loud. She realized that the fight for change had just begun, and that she would have to explain what should have been obvious to those who were used to seeing a client's status and appearance first and foremost. But Christine didn't let her emotions take over. She took a deep breath and began to speak, sharing how, in her own experience, she had faced similar attitudes when people judged her by appearance and status. She spoke about how she had felt like an outsider in places where she was seen as someone who didn't deserve good service. Christine knew that her words might not immediately convince Roger and his supporters, but she believed that this conversation was important, even if its results wouldn't be immediate. However, Roger remained adamant. He made no effort to hide his disappointment that the company he had relied on and become accustomed to was suddenly changing. For him, Silver Thread was a place where an atmosphere of exclusivity reigned, and he considered maintaining this atmosphere his personal mission. He spoke candidly to Christine, without mincing words, stating that he believed her approach was a sign of weakness, that it would ruin the brand's image and alienate the clients for whom, in his view, the store existed. He claimed that wealthy customers, who brought in the majority of the revenue, expected exclusivity not only for themselves, but also in how others were treated, those who, in their opinion, didn't belong in that world. Christine listened carefully, understanding that behind Roger's words lay not just a fear of change, but deeply ingrained stereotypes. She understood that for people like Roger, Racial bias was part of their worldview, where success and status were determined by outward signs. For him, it was unfamiliar to see a black man in simple clothing as a potential customer, deserving of the same respect as any other visitor. His perspective was rooted in the belief that people like Mark and people like Roger lived in different worlds, and those worlds should not intersect. The situation with Roger left Christine not only disappointed, but also aware that she needed support. She needed something more than internal training sessions to change the store's culture. She knew that Mark would support her, but it was important to her that he see firsthand the challenges she was facing. Christine decided to call Mark and ask him to personally conduct a meeting with the staff to clarify the company's stance and support her efforts. Mark agreed without hesitation, and soon a meeting was held at the boutique with all the staff present. Mark stood before them in a sharp suit with a determined expression and began to speak about the values on which Silver Thread was founded. He spoke about how his goal was not just to sell expensive clothing, but to create an atmosphere where every customer felt valued. He shared his own experiences, those of a black man who had faced bias and been rejected based on his appearance. Mark recounted how he felt when he walked into his own store and saw that he was being judged by his skin color, not by his merits and accomplishments. He spoke about how painful it was to relive that sense of rejection, especially in a place he had created himself. He openly stated that such an approach was not only unacceptable for the business, but also contrary to his personal beliefs. Mark understood that his words wouldn't change the opinions of all the employees immediately, but he was prepared for that. He knew that for many of them, their familiar views and beliefs had become a part of their work, but he also knew that change was possible. He emphasized that every person, regardless of their background, deserved respect, and that the future of Silver Thread depended on whether they could create a store where clients didn't fear being judged by their appearance or status. Roger, sitting in the back row, glared at Mark, barely concealing his resentment and disappointment. For him, it was a sign that his time was passing, that his approach was no longer valued. But in Mark's words, there was not just criticism, but a call for change. He offered everyone willing to learn and adapt the chance to remain and become part of a new era at the company. But he also made it clear that those unwilling to embrace these values would no longer be able to work at Silver Thread. For Christine, this was a pivotal moment. She felt that Mark was not just supporting her, but was also ready to take responsibility for the changes. Her attitude toward the employees remained unchanged. She was still willing to help anyone who wanted to improve, but now she had the confidence that she and Mark were moving in the right direction. After the meeting, several employees approached Christine and Mark to express their support and gratitude for opening their eyes to important matters. They admitted that they hadn't considered how their attitudes could affect customers and were ready to try to change their approach. Christine felt that her efforts were not in vain, that small steps toward respect and inclusivity were beginning to yield results. However, some, like Roger, remained on the sidelines, clearly unhappy with the new rules. Mark understood that not everyone was ready for change, but he was certain of one thing. Silver Thread would become the place he had always dreamed of, even if it meant holding more meetings and convincing more skeptics. He knew that achieving this goal would take time, but he was ready to fight for every step toward justice. After Mark's speech at the Silver Thread boutique, it seemed that change was beginning to take shape. Christine Martin, the interim manager, saw the first fruits of her efforts. Some staff members began to treat customers differently, showing more warmth and respect without making assumptions based on appearance. She noticed how some salespeople took the initiative to assist clients, regardless of their looks or style of dress. But despite these positive shifts, there were still those who stubbornly resisted the new approach. Among them was Roger, a senior salesperson with years of experience, who had become a symbol of resistance to change. To him, the new rules seemed absurd and out of place in the world of luxury retail. He didn't hide his irritation and frequently spoke out against the inclusivity policy. He saw himself as a guardian of the old traditions, where luxury and exclusivity meant selective treatment of clients. In Roger's eyes, Silver Thread had always been a place for people with money and status, not for those who didn't look like typical buyers. The situation reached a boiling point one afternoon when an African-American couple entered the store, dressed simply, but showing interest in the expensive suits and dresses. They were intrigued by one of the most costly suits on display and asked to see it up close. Roger, upon seeing them, made no effort to hide his displeasure. He approached the couple, but instead of offering assistance with professional courtesy, he condescendingly suggested that perhaps they should look at something more affordable. His words carried a snide undertone, as if he was certain they couldn't afford the purchase. Christine noticed the incident and, without hesitation, asked Roger to step aside. She personally attended to the clients, offering them a closer look at the suit and explaining its features in detail. Her voice was sincere, and she made no assumptions about the couple's financial means. The clients were grateful for her attention, and after a long discussion, they decided to make a purchase, choosing the expensive suit that had caught their eye from the start. After the couple left the store, Christine returned to Roger. Their conversation took place in the back room, and Christine firmly reminded him that such behavior was unacceptable. Roger, however, refused to back down. He claimed that he was simply protecting the store's interests, that clients like them were unlikely to make serious purchases, and that he was just trying to save time for both himself and them. His words revealed dissatisfaction, but also a fear of changes that disrupted his familiar notion of who fit the boutique. Christine couldn't hide her frustration, seeing how deeply entrenched racial stereotypes were in Roger. She reminded him that Silver Thread was not just a place to sell clothes, but a space where everyone should feel respected, regardless of their skin color or how much money they had. She understood that Roger wouldn't change his beliefs overnight, but she could no longer tolerate his dismissive attitude toward clients. This incident became a turning point for the entire team. Many salespeople, who had previously stayed silent or sided with Roger, began to rethink their attitudes. They saw how Christine treated customers with respect and warmth, and noticed that it yielded real results. People left the store happy, leaving positive reviews and making purchases they might not have initially planned. For many employees, it was a revelation. Respectful treatment could bring just as much profit as cold selectiveness. Mark wasn't standing idly by either. He continued to support Christine, holding additional meetings with the staff and emphasizing that they were building a new image for the company, one based on respect for all people. He knew that fighting bias was not just about changing policy, but changing minds, which takes time. He spoke about his personal experiences, reminding everyone that each customer is a person with their own story, and that their job was to see the person behind the appearance, not the stereotype. Yet the situation with Roger remained difficult. He became increasingly distant from the rest of the team, seeing Mark and Christine as a threat to his familiar position. One day, when Mark visited the boutique again, he noticed that Roger was avoiding his gaze and interacting with clients with a strained politeness that was difficult to call genuine. Mark realized that Roger still hadn't accepted the changes and likely never would. Christine offered Roger additional training on inclusivity, but he refused, stating that he didn't need lectures on how to treat people. He continued to insist that he knew his clients better than anyone else, and that his experience was more important than new rules that, in his opinion, undermined the foundation of the business. This refusal was the final straw for Mark. He gathered Christine and Roger in the office and explained that despite Roger's years of experience, the company needed those who were willing to move forward and learn. He offered Roger the chance to reconsider his views or leave the company. Feeling betrayed and disappointed, Roger chose the latter. He left the store, leaving behind a trail of dissatisfaction and resentment. After Roger left the boutique, the atmosphere began to change even more rapidly. Employees who had previously been afraid to go against the old ways felt that they could now work without fear of being judged for treating every client with respect. Christine organized additional training sessions, where she explained that their job was not to judge clients by their appearance, but to create an environment where everyone felt welcome. She emphasized that their role wasn't just about sales, but about giving people positive experiences. With Roger's departure, Mark and Christine felt a heavy burden lift from their shoulders. It was a painful but necessary step toward creating a new silver thread. Mark knew that he had lost one of his oldest employees, but he also knew that he had gained something more important, a chance to build a company where respect and inclusivity were not just words on paper, but a reality that every employee embodied in their work. A month had passed since Andrew Hall left the Silver Thread Boutique on Madison Avenue. During this time, under Christine Martin's leadership, the store began to take on a new character. The atmosphere became more open and friendly, and the staff grew increasingly attuned to the principles of respect and inclusivity that Mark Watson had established. Customers who had once felt unwelcome due to their appearance or style of dress began to return, feeling more comfortable in this transformed space. It seemed as though the past, with its biases, had been left behind. However, one morning, Andrew reappeared at the store. He looked completely different from the days when he was the manager. His once impeccably pressed suit was slightly wrinkled, and his face appeared tired and worn. The confidence with which he had always entered the boutique's doors was gone. Now his eyes held humility and a sense of defeat, as if life had taught him a hard lesson over the past month. He quietly asked for a meeting with Mark, and though Christine was surprised by his appearance, she agreed to relay his request. When Mark learned that Andrew had returned and wanted to speak with him, he agreed to meet him in the boutique's office. He was curious about what his former manager had come to say and what might have changed over these weeks. Andrew sat across from Mark, nervously rubbing his hands, his gaze directed downward as if avoiding eye contact with the man he had once treated with disdain. Mark noticed that a different person sat before him now, a man whom life had forced to reflect on his behavior. Andrew began to speak, his voice tinged with notes of regret and remorse. He admitted his mistakes, recounting how he had spent a long time reflecting on everything that had happened, and how he had come to realize that his prejudice and arrogance had been more than just mistakes. They were harmful habits that had hurt not only clients, but the entire company. He spoke of how his perspective on the world had always been narrow, and that during his time working with Mark, he had for the first time understood how destructive stereotypes could be. Andrew explained that losing his job had been a severe blow. He realized that he had lost more than just a prestigious position. His own illusions about being the best manager had been shattered. He had seen how his own biases led to poor decisions and mistreatment of people, which forced him to rethink his behavior. He had come to ask Mark for a second chance. Andrew assured him that he had changed and was willing to work on himself to prove his commitment to the company's new values. Mark listened silently, without interrupting. He heard the sincerity in Andrew's words, but also understood that words alone were not enough to change the situation. When Andrew finished speaking, Mark paused, giving himself time to consider his confession. He saw that Andrew was truly troubled by his past actions and wanted to atone for them, but Mark knew that true change required time, effort, and concrete actions, not just remorse. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was firm but not hostile. He thanked Andrew for finding the courage to come and admit his mistakes. He noted that few people are willing to acknowledge their wrongs, and that this, indeed, was worthy of respect. However, he also explained that he needed proof of change, not just words. Mark emphasized that working at Silver Thread now required complete alignment with the company's new principles of inclusivity, equal treatment, and respect for every customer. He told Andrew that the company was moving forward and that he needed people who were ready to uphold its new values in practice, not just in words. He explained that rebuilding trust would take time and that for now, Andrew could not return to his former position, no matter how sincerely he might regret his actions. Upon hearing the refusal, Andrew lowered his head and disappointment flashed in his eyes. He had been prepared for this, but he still hoped for a different outcome. Mark, seeing his reaction, encouraged him not to lose hope and to continue working on himself. He suggested that if Andrew truly wanted to change, he could look for opportunities elsewhere, demonstrating his willingness to adapt, and perhaps one day they could revisit his role in the company. Mark also offered Andrew advice: to use this experience for personal growth and a re-evaluation of his views. He emphasized that acknowledging one's mistakes is only the first step, but the actions that follow are what truly matter. Mark said that he was glad to see that Andrew had recognized his mistakes, but that it would take more than a desire to improve for him to become part of Silver Thread again. Andrew looked up at Mark, and his eyes conveyed gratitude for the honesty. He understood that Mark held no grudges against him, but also realized that returning to his previous position was something he would have to earn, not just with apologies, but with concrete actions. Andrew thanked Mark for the meeting, slowly rose, and walked towards the exit. His steps were heavy, but there was something new in his gaze. Perhaps it was a determination to change his life, starting with a re-evaluation of how he treated others. After Andrew left, Mark remained in the office, alone with his thoughts. He knew he had made the right decision by denying the return to the previous role, but at the same time, he hoped that Andrew might truly change. For Mark, this was not only a fight for his business, but an attempt to build a society where people learn from their mistakes and become better. He knew that there was still much work ahead, but he was confident that every step toward respect and inclusivity, no matter how difficult, was leading the company to a better future. That day reminded Mark that changing people's mindsets takes time and that not everyone is ready to accept these changes right away. But he also saw that the efforts he and Christine had put in over the past month were already beginning to bear fruit. The company Silver Thread remained on the path to becoming a place where people feel respected, no matter who they are or where they come from. Several months had passed since Christine Martin took over as manager of the Silver Thread boutique on Madison Avenue, and her efforts were starting to yield tangible results. Under her leadership, the store's atmosphere had changed dramatically. Friendliness and openness became the cornerstone of a new approach to customers, and every day marked another step toward creating a more inclusive space where anyone could feel like a welcomed guest. Christine put a great deal of effort into working with the staff, organizing regular training sessions and discussions focused on the art of customer interaction. She taught the team to see every visitor as an individual, not just a purchasing power. She spoke about the importance of being attentive and respectful to everyone who walked through their doors, regardless of their appearance or status. Christine shared her knowledge and experience, explaining that the true success of the store wasn't just in sales volume, but in how clients felt when they left. The results of her work became visible to everyone. Customers began to leave more positive reviews, talking about how warmly they were greeted at Silver Thread and how attentive the staff was to their needs. Many of those who had previously felt uncomfortable now gladly returned to the boutique, knowing they wouldn't be judged based on their clothing or appearance. The store's atmosphere became warmer, and even the most skeptical employees began to acknowledge that the new approach was indeed working. Inspired by Christine's example, the staff took pride in their ability to connect with every customer and create a unique experience for all who visited the boutique. Their focus was no longer just on providing service, but on making each client's visit memorable. Employees proudly shared stories of finding common ground with customers who might have previously felt out of place in the store. They exchanged stories about how a simple smile or a kind word could change a customer's day, and how this, in turn, positively affected their own mood and confidence. Mark Watson, who closely observed the ongoing changes, was genuinely impressed by Christine's work. He saw how her efforts to improve the culture of customer interactions gradually transformed the very essence of the business. Mark often visited the boutique to see firsthand that the new approach was effective. With each visit, he noticed how the atmosphere grew lighter and how the staff became more confident and open. He saw clients who once entered the boutique cautiously, now feeling free to discuss their preferences with the salespeople and finding items that truly suited them. One day, when Mark visited the boutique to thank the team for their success, he invited Christine to his office for a conversation. He understood that her contribution to the store's transformation was far greater than he had initially anticipated. Over a cup of coffee, he shared his observations and expressed deep gratitude for her dedication and perseverance in promoting the company's new values. Mark told Christine that her work had not gone unnoticed and that he could see she had truly transformed the store, turning it into a place where customers felt welcome and employees took pride in what they did. He acknowledged that her approach had become a model for what every Silver Thread boutique should aspire to be. Inspired by the results, Mark decided to make Christine the permanent manager and entrusted her with expanding the training program to other stores in the network. This offer took Christine by surprise, but she felt ready to take on the challenge. She understood that there was still much work ahead, but she was determined to share her experience and vision with other teams. Her new task was not only to continue building on the success of the Madison Avenue boutique, but also to introduce the new principles across the entire Silver Thread network. She was to organize training for staff in other stores, helping them understand that inclusivity and respect for clients were keys to long-term success. Christine began developing a training program for the other stores, focusing on the principles that had already proven effective. She organized a series of seminars and workshops where she spoke about the importance of cultural awareness, shared examples from her own work, and explained how to balance high service standards with openness to all clients. She saw this not just as a task of improving service, but as an opportunity to change the culture of the entire company. For Mark, this was more than a strategic decision. He saw that Christine shared his vision and was ready to become his partner in building a company where everyone felt respected. Mark understood that the success of the entire Silver Thread network now depended on whether he and Christine could inspire other managers and employees to adopt their values and approach. Soon, the first seminars took place in other Silver Thread boutiques, and the results were quick to follow. Christine, traveling to different cities, met with teams, explaining the importance of seeing each person as an individual, not just a customer. She shared stories about how attentiveness to clients could change their day and turn a simple store visit into a positive experience. Mark and Christine saw how their efforts began to impact the entire chain of stores. Customer feedback improved, and the atmosphere in the boutiques changed for the better. Employees who had previously felt uncertain about working with different types of clients started to embrace new approaches and took pride in their ability to create a unique experience for everyone. Mark knew that the journey toward change wasn't over, but he felt that with Christine by his side, they were on the right path. Now, Christine wasn't just the manager of a single boutique. She had become a key figure in the transformation of the entire company. She knew that this was a responsibility and a challenge, but she felt the strength and inspiration to keep moving forward. For her, this wasn't just a new stage in her career, but an opportunity to reshape the perception of luxury, to show that true respect for clients is what makes Silver Thread truly unique. For Mark and Christine, this success confirmed that the path they had chosen was the right one. They believed that the future of Silver Thread lay in becoming a network of boutiques where clients felt respected and valued, regardless of how they looked or how much they were willing to spend. Now they faced a new goal, to make Silver Thread a model for the entire industry, proving that luxury and respect can go hand in hand. Several months had passed since Christine Martin took on the role of leading the transformation of the Silver Thread boutique network. Her work in implementing a new policy of inclusivity and respect for every client had yielded visible results, and the chain of stores had now gained a new reputation, a place where luxury blended with warmth and openness. Mark Watson, inspired by Christine's success, felt that his company was truly heading in the right direction. He saw that each Silver Thread store had become more than just a retail outlet. It had turned into a space where every person was valued and respected. The day came when Mark decided to organize a meeting at the company's headquarters with all the managers in the network to discuss the results of their work and share his vision for the future. This was a crucial moment, a chance to reflect on how far they had come and to think about what still needed to be done. Christine and the other managers, who had already implemented the new approach in their boutiques, attended the meeting. Mark began the gathering with a brief speech, sharing his impressions of how the atmosphere in the stores had changed. He spoke about how the path they had chosen was not easy, but he and Christine had proven that change was possible. He reminded everyone that their mission was not just to sell clothes, but to create a space where every person felt important. Mark's words carried confidence, and he could see that his team listened with respect and understanding. Christine also gave a speech, sharing stories about how her work had changed not only the customers, but also the staff. She spoke of salespeople who initially did not understand the importance of the new approach, but who now proudly embrace the ideas of equality and inclusivity. She talked about how the stores had become places where people found not only luxury items, but also a sense of respect. Her words inspired everyone present, and Mark realized that she had become a true leader for the entire Silver Thread network. But the highlight of the meeting was the news that Mark had prepared for everyone. He announced that he planned to open a new flagship boutique in one of Los Angeles's prestigious neighborhoods, a place where competition for customer attention was especially fierce. This store was to symbolize a new chapter in the company's history, and Mark offered Christine the opportunity to lead its opening and launch.